We are so excited to have Whole Foods Market as a new sponsor because it just makes sense. We're all about good food and healthy choices, so this feels like such a natural fit. And fall is the season where we always end up hosting. Whole Foods Market makes it so easy to pull together a spread that feels special without stressing. For us, frozen pizzas are a go-to, and right now they're 50% off with Prime. And since Halloween is around the corner, I love that all the candy at Whole Foods Market is made without synthetic red dyes, no high fructose corn syrup, and no artificial sweeteners, which obviously is my jam. And the best part, if I'm busy with the podcast, I can just order pickup or delivery and still look like I planned it all out. Make your next fall gathering delicious and memorable with Whole Foods Market. Save 50%. That's right, 50% with Prime on select frozen pizzas through October 28th. Terms apply. Visit your local Whole Foods Market today, in-store or online. Happy fall.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony Nippy Ames, and this is A Little Bit Culty.
We woke up from a cult, and that journey was captured in The Vow on HBO and in my memoir, Scarred.
Now, in this podcast, we break down the shame and secrets that make these experiences so destructive with honest conversations on how seemingly benign groups can cross into the cultiverse and how to spot and recover from trouble if it happens to you.
Each week, we bring in experts, survivors, and whistleblowers to explore red flags, resilience, and even share a few laughs because sometimes you gotta laugh.
Subscribe to our Patreon for early and ad-free listening, some live Q&A, and exclusive content at patreon.com/alittlebitculty.
Welcome to Season 8 of A Little Bit Culty.
Welcome back to A Little Bit Culty, everyone.
Today's guest is Joshua Paddison, a historian of American religion and professor at Texas State University.
With a PhD from UCLA, Josh has authored over 10 books and articles, including his latest work, Unholy Sensations, a story of sex, scandal, and California's first cult scare.
From the book insert. In 1891, a suffragist and social reformer named Elzéar Chevalier launched a moral crusade to destroy Fountain Grove, a utopian spiritualist community in Northern California. Chevalier accused the colony's leader, poet and prophet Thomas Lake Harris, of perverting the teachings of the Bible to promote a new sexology that was, quote, worse than Mormonism.
She insisted that Harris used magical powers of hypnosis to take sexual and financial advantage of his followers, turning them into, quote, spiritual harem that practiced free love and other gross immoralities.
The international scandal, full of all sorts of salacious details prized by newspaper editors at the dawn of the era of yellow journalism, would last more than a decade, establishing Harris as a prototype for a new type of public menace, the California cult leader.
In this episode, we dive into the origins of the cult label, exploring what the first cult was, why some groups earn the title while others don't, and how California became synonymous with cults.
Please join us as we unpack this fascinating history and cultural lure of cults in America in this two-part conversation.
Welcome, Joshua Paddison.
Josh Paddison, welcome officially to A Little Bit Culty.
Thanks for having me.
This is really exciting. When we got your book, at first I was not sure what the angle would be because it's so like academic, you know, in some ways, because you are an academic.
Yes.
Like, what do you call yourself?
I'm a U.S. historian.
A U.S. historian, okay.
This should have been our very first episode.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, okay, this might be a little dry from that perspective.
Those are personally my, because I was a history major, I can get into it. I love it.
And just so you know, we haven't covered a lot of the older cults like Jim Jones and Koresh and a little bit on the Moonies, but there's so much new stuff, right? But I found as I read your book that I was like, holy shit, this is the original. This is the GOAT.
This is the OG.
So I think our audience is going to be really excited about this because it lays the foundation for all these things we're dealing with now.
Yeah, that was my hope, is to go back and trace what's the genesis of so many of the ideas around the cult that are so commonplace today. Where did these come from? And to my surprise, not a lot of scholars had looked into that question.
That's incredible. Tell us a little bit about you and your background and what led you to even investigating this topic.
Sure. I grew up in Oregon and was interested in history pretty early. And I grew up in the Church of the Nazarene, which is a evangelical Protestant church, very restrictive, a lot of rules around, not dancing and not swearing and not watching movies and a lot of things like that I grew up struggling with and, had a crisis of faith when I was a teenager and left the church. But I think that experience growing up in that environment made me very interested in religion. A lot of academic historians and a lot of academics in general don't take religion very seriously. And it's something that I take very seriously as a force that motivates people, that shapes society, because I saw it in my own family and in the community I grew up in. So I always knew I wanted to study religion when I went to graduate school. And I went to UCLA for a PhD, and I studied initially religion and race in the 19th century. And that kind of led me to the story of Fountain Grove, which ended up becoming my second book.
Well, I'm one of the people that didn't take religion seriously. I dismissed it. I'm partly because I had a grandmother who tried to cram it down my throat, and my natural instincts were, no, I'm good. So that was a little naive. I'm finding out.
So what was your first hit on Fountain Grove? I guess I'm dying to know, we're going to follow the arcs of the people who came in and out of Fountain Grove later in this episode. But for you, what was your journey like as you started to peel back the layers?
When you're writing a book, it's a very long process. And ultimately, I have visited more than 20 archives. I found thousands of primary sources. But it started when I was at UCLA as a graduate student, and I was searching for a topic, and I was reading an old history book, and it mentioned the Fountain Grove spiritualist colony in Santa Rosa, California, where they made wine, and they were the first winery in Sonoma County to ship their wines internationally. And that seemed really fascinating. And there was one paragraph about a sex scandal in the 1890s that I read, and I thought, that's interesting. And the colony was accused of practicing free love, and that the men and women were all having sex with each other, and that Thomas Lake Harris, this leader, was hypnotizing them and forcing them to do it. So as soon as I read that, I was fascinated. And I started doing research on it, but I put it aside. I did a different topic for my dissertation because writing about a cult wasn't good for my career, according to my advisor. It wasn't serious enough for an academic dissertation. And so I put it aside, but it was a project that I kept sneaking time for when I was doing other research. And then once my first book came out, this became the project I was just obsessed with. And it had so many layers. It had race because there were Japanese immigrant men living at Fountain Grove who became part of the scandal. It had all these other kind of marginalized or outsider religions like Theosophy and the Swedenborgian Church and Christian Science. It had them all involved in the story. And so it was a story that just kept giving the more I learned about it.
The gift that keeps on giving. Fountain Grove.
Also, so many ideologies being thrown into the salad, and it seems like it's a world of competing ideologies.
Absolutely. Yeah. The 19th century was a period of explosive religious innovation, growth, new religions, and ultimately the idea of the cult that will come out in the 1890s.
So do you feel like we need to do a little history lesson here? You teach, by the way, right?
Yes, I teach history at Texas State University.
Okay, so let's pretend we're your students.
Get the history, but I also think it's important to understand the zeitgeist of media, and I want the audience to have an impression of cults,
all the things.
Cult's not really a word. Media doesn't have an understanding. There's no coercion. So it just, to me...
Well, there is coercion. They just don't call it that.
They don't have the...
This is pre-Me Too.
Yeah,
Hashtag Me Too.
Yeah.
Yes.
And anyway, I'll let you go. But I think that's when I'm reading it, I'm like, oh my God, they have no idea. This is the first one that's coming in. And then it's coming into a media that is appropriately skeptical, but of what they don't know yet, I guess, is what I'm... driving at.
Yeah. So given that, good point, Ned, but like what are all the sort of key things that we need to know about what's happening in the world before this scandal?
There you go. There's the question.
that makes the, volcano erupt, as it were.
Sure. Yeah, so a lot of the religious changes that are happening in the 19th century are coming out of what historians call the Second Great Awakening. And this is in the 1820s and 1830s. A lot of the kind of more famous movements of the 19th century, such as the Mormons, right, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, came out of this Second Great Awakening. And it was a series of revivals and experiments in utopian communities. And a lot of them were, pacifists and vegetarians and feminists and abolitionists and dedicated to real social change. And it has to do with sort of broader economic changes that are happening during the time. But what you see is this kind of explosion of new religions and new religious practices, and new people are preaching. You see African Americans preaching, you see women preaching, and it's a democratization of religion that's happening. But because you've got so many competing groups that are out there, it creates a lot of confusion and creates a lot of anxiety. And the media in the 19th century was very partisan, right? It's actually similar to today. We all have our media bubbles where I get my news from and you get your news from. That was true in the 19th century. The press in the 19th century was partisan. There were Democratic newspapers, there were Republican papers, and you got the news from your source. And so you start to see by the end of the 19th century, media start to embrace modern techniques such as the scandal story and what will be called yellow journalism, right? And what becomes a story that the media is interested in and that people are interested in is stories about religions that are outside the mainstream. So that becomes like a whole subgenre of writing about groups that later would be classified as cults.
Would you say it's safe to say that covering those stories is good for business as well? So that's somewhat driving, it's a system that feeds itself, right?
Absolutely. You think about, Hearst versus Pulitzer, right? And this kind of classic duel of newspaper publishers. They are seeking stories that appeal to urban audiences. So if it's got sex, if it's got scandal, if it's got race, if it's got, weird religion, all of that makes it all the more enticing.
They were crazy back then doing that, weren't they? You don't see that today at all.
Yes, right.
Yeah, we've gotten so much responsible in that, yeah.
Okay, so give us a little history lesson also on, and by the way, this is so fascinating to us because so many of the things that we've covered have mentioned, New Thought, Christian Science, but I didn't know how far back it went, who created it, what was going on. And when you hear about some of these things, you're like, wow, they saw a spirit and then they named it and then I'm thinking about Mormonism and how Joseph Smith said the same thing, and now that's such a massive successful religion.
And yet again, upstate New York.
Yeah, okay. Also, sidebar for a second. What's happening in upstate New York that's producing all of this craziness? What's happening there?
Yeah, so upstate New York becomes known as the burned over district during the early 1800s because of these religious fires that one after another burn across upstate New York. And I think most historians would point to the economic changes that are happening. The Erie Canal has gone through, right, connecting the Great Lakes to the eastern seaboard. You see all these new instant cities that are appearing along the Erie Canal. It's a hub of commercial activity, manufacturing, factories, early industrialization.
Edison.
People are seeking religion, right? If you move to a city, you don't know anybody. One of the things that you can do, now and then is join a church. And so there was a whole series of revivals that took place all up and down this Erie Canal region, to the point that then the whole upstate New York becomes infamous for these new religions. So Joseph Smith's working there, William Miller, who's a farmer who puts down his plow and starts a huge religious movement around the end of the world. He predicted to the exact day that the world would end. And then the Millerites suffered a great disappointment when the day came and nothing seemed to actually happen. and then they became the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Yeah. Spiritualism was born, right, in this burned over district as well with the Fox sisters, 1848. Yep. So they were the first mediums who spoke to ghosts and spirits, right? So the upstate New York becomes really the birthplace of so many 19th century movements.
Was spiritualism with the Fox sisters, was it the first time that became trendy? And can you just define it? Is it the idea that you can connect and communicate with spirits? Is that the basis of it?
Yes.
Irrefutable claims. Basically.
That was the claim. Now, there'd been ghost stories before the Fox sisters, right? There'd been people like the Quakers who'd had some claims of speaking to spirits. But what the Fox sisters did is they took it and made it a popular pastime. The seance became a fad. You know, thousands, hundreds of thousands of Americans attended a seance or attended a trance performance where a spiritualist would channel, we would say nowadays, or, you know, they would speak with a spirit or the spirit would speak through them. And it became a way for people to test claims about the afterlife because theoretically you're getting the word right from the afterlife itself. Also speaking to your departed loved ones, right? I mean, think about the Civil War, which is going to break out in 1861. How many people are dying? And spiritualism gave people a way to communicate with their departed loved ones. So spiritualism becomes a phenomenon. It kind of nestles within Christianity, but it also could stretch outside of Christianity. And so certain spiritualists are going to move outside traditional Christianity and become their own religion ultimately.
Now, where does Christian Science fit into this?
Mary Baker Eddy would be the founder of Christian Science, and she was very interested in healing and health. She had a fall when she was a young woman. She had a terrible injury and illness, and she tried a lot of unusual methods like water cure and mesmerism and other non-traditional methods that were available. And she ended up founding a new religion, Christian Science, which made the claim fundamentally that the material world is all an illusion, right? That everything is within your mind. And she rejected medicine, right? That's kind of what they're most famous for, is rejecting doctors and medicine and using prayer and mental healing to heal people, right? If the illness is not real, if there's no physical world, then it is all in your mind. And that's the way you should be healing it. So Mary Baker Eddy started this movement in Boston. She establishes a school. And from there, she trains all kinds of people who go off, a lot of them women. A lot of these movements were very feminist. A lot of these women then would go off and start their own churches and their own healing centers. And those would become New Thought by the later 1890s.
And what was the difference between New Thought and Christian Science?
New Thought was a broadening of Mary Baker Eddy's movement. Mary Baker Eddy tried to control the movement, and she didn't like all of these people kind of taking the core of her ideas and turning them into different things that they were making money off of instead of her. And her best students tended to go off and leave Christian Science and start their own things. And she actually copyrighted the term Christian Science and fought back against this. So New Thought was in some ways just a generic form of Christian Science. But over time, New Thought would start to develop its own characteristics. And so it becomes known as the get-rich-quick religion by the 1910s and 1920s because people are being drawn to it through the idea that thinking positively can change your life. And if all of reality is an illusion, it's really about your willpower and your faith that affects things, right? And so it does start to change when it becomes New Thought, and it starts to become less feminist, and it starts to become more about material success.
This episode would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. Let's hear what they have to offer. You know that feeling when you're eating pretty clean, taking your supplements, doing all the right things, and yet your gut's still cranky, your energy's meh, and your skin's just not giving that glow? Yeah, same. That's why we are so excited about our newest sponsor, Cowboy Colostrum. Colostrum has been liquid gold for a reason. It's the first nutrition we ever get at birth, packed with immune factors, growth compounds, and nutrients our bodies still crave. Cowboy Colostrum does it right. Whole, first-day milking only, never over-processed, never diluted, and always ethically harvested after the calf gets theirs first. Mix it in your coffee, milk, smoothie. It's ridiculously easy. Vanilla and a cold brew latte. Chef's kiss. I had one this morning, and then I did another one, chocolate, because it was that good. Strawberry, basically a milkshake. People swear by it for gut health, hair growth, immunity, recovery, and honestly, I feel the difference. This morning, I woke up feeling like I might be getting sick. I did 2 doses, and I'm feeling so much better. Besides, there's no fillers, no junk, just pure, grass-fed, small-batch colostrum from regenerative U.S. farms. It's nature's original superfood. With a cowboy hat. For a limited time, our listeners get 25% off their entire order. Just head to cowboycolostrum.com and use code CULTY at checkout. That's 25% off when you use code CULTY at cowboycolostrum.com. After you purchase, they will ask where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them our show sent you. Enjoy! This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Did you know October 10th is World Mental Health Day? This year, BetterHelp is shining a well-deserved spotlight on the therapists who make the world a better, more compassionate place. Therapists guide us through our toughest moments, help us break through feeling stuck, and remind us that asking for help is something to be proud of, not ashamed of. Personally, there was a moment in therapy recently that changed my perspective. I realized I didn't have to carry everything alone and finally started setting healthy boundaries that made my whole life lighter. If you haven't tried therapy yet, just know that talking to someone even once can make a difference, especially if there's something that keeps you up at night or weighs on your mind. BetterHelp has connected people to the right therapist for over 12 years with a network of more than 30,000 fully licensed professionals working under a strict code of conduct. Their matching process is simple and proven. Fill out a quick questionnaire and BetterHelp matches you with therapists tailored to your needs and preferences. If it's not a perfect fit, you can switch therapists anytime. No awkwardness or extra cost. With an average 4.9 out of 5-star rating from over 1.7 million client reviews, BetterHelp is trusted by more than 5 million people worldwide. The right support can be life-changing. Consider reaching out. You deserve it. This World Mental Health Day, we're celebrating the therapists who've helped millions of people take a step forward. If you're ready to find the right therapist for you, BetterHelp can help you start that journey. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/culty. That's betterhelp.com/culty. By now, you've probably heard of Build, where you can earn points on your monthly rent payment. But did you know they make it possible for you to get more outside of your home too? By paying rent through Build, you can earn flexible points that can be redeemed towards hundreds of hotels and airlines, a future rent payment, your next Lyft ride, and more. But it doesn't stop there. Build is about making your entire neighborhood more rewarding. You can dine out at your favorite local restaurants and earn additional points, get VIP treatment at certain fitness studios, and enjoy exclusive experiences just for Built members every month. Built is turning a monthly expense into an opportunity to earn rewards and discover the best that your neighborhood has to offer. Your rent is finally working for you. Earn points on rent and around your neighborhood wherever you call home by going to joinbuilt.com/culty. That's joinbilt.com/culty. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Did you skip over all the ads? We hope you didn't. Thank you to our sponsors and thank you for listening. Now, let's resume our culty convo. Our audience will appreciate that this episode comes a few weeks after an episode we did with an author named Bridget Reed, who did a history book about MLMs, Little Bosses Everywhere. Did you read that?
Mm-mm.
I think you'd like it because as a historian, it pulls a lot of the things. In fact, I was reading your book at the same time I was reading her book, and you were both talking about some of the same people. And I was quite interested to see where these worlds overlapped. Her focus is on MLM, but a lot of MLM and the sort of philosophy around, creating your own wealth and the tools, the personal development tools that go with a lot of MLMs come from New Thought. Did we cover enough of the history in terms of the zeitgeist, as Nippy said, or is there anything else we need to mention before we get into the hero of the hour?
I think the LDS Church probably deserves a little more attention just because the Mormons were such a despised and persecuted group in the 19th century. And it's truly remarkable how far they came in terms of becoming a mainstream religion, right? They're one of the few examples of a group that starts as a cult, right? Although they weren't called that when they first started, because that term didn't exist yet, which we can get into. But they were demonized, persecuted, literally driven from state to state. Joseph Smith was lynched, right, by a mob. They had to leave the United States to go to Utah, right, to pursue their religious freedom. And by the 20th century, they've become just kind of one more religious group in America, to the point that Mitch Romney was able to become the Republican nominee for president. And it wasn't that big of a deal that he was a Mormon. Truly amazing. And it was not coincidence, right? The church leaders embarked on a series of decisions that made them much more mainstream, starting with abandoning polygamy in 1890 and emphasizing Jesus Christ in their teachings, and even increasing the size of Jesus Christ and the font size of Jesus Christ on their scripture, and retitling the Book of Mormon with a new subtitle emphasizing a New Testament, and allowing African Americans into the priesthood, which happened in the 1970s, right? So there was a whole series of things that the LDS Church did to become much more of a mainstream kind of quasi-Christian group, which is remarkable given how much attention and persecution they suffered, including from the federal government in the 19th century.
Would you say is their ability to pivot and market themselves better that ultimately was one of the things that allowed that kind of victory? I guess if they're the last one standing from that time, it seems like they made some good decisions. Yes,
they marketed themselves, they changed doctrine, they changed policy, and they broadened their appeal to the point that, they had a very widespread campaign about 10 or 15 years ago called I'm a Mormon, where they were trying to rebrand the term Mormon. And then more recently, they've decided, well, actually, that term has too much baggage, so they prefer to just be called the LDS Church and not even want to use that term Mormon because of the baggage that comes with it, and maybe the associations with the fundamentalist LDS Church, right? So it is somewhat marketing, and it also has to do with real doctrinal changes that they made along the way in terms of practice, sexual practice, marriage practice, and who's allowed to be a priest and who's not.
Did you ever go to Utah and see their buildings? Have you ever been down to Salt Lake?
Yeah.
Isn't that wildly
it's crazy.
Impressive? Like the wealth and what they've built. I mean, not impressive. I'm not celebrating it, but just in awe of the.
No, I mean,
I don't even know the word.
It's, you go back to Rome and Europe, you see these big structures. It's, it's what these churches do, right?
Yeah. No, they're a success story in many ways.
The LDS, the successful cult.
Air quotes.
Yeah. Okay. What about, do we need to mention Oneida, do you think?
Yeah, Oneida is also one of the more infamous 19th century communes, and they became infamous for their sexual practices, right? So many of these groups that become villainized, it's because of what they're doing sexually. And so for Oneida, John Humphrey Noyes was the leader. This is in New York, mid-19th century. And Noyes, in that burdened over district we were talking about, has this idea of perfectionism, right? That's what his movement was called, this idea that you can live without sin. Many people who are perfectionists believe that they could perfect society as well. So it bleeds over into those reform movements like abolition that I was talking about. But they were really interested in removing themselves from the world. And you see this in a lot of these communes and communitarian experiments and utopias that there were hundreds of in the 19th century. And then we saw another period in the 1960s and 1970s more recently, where you see a lot of these kinds of these utopian impulses, right? For Noyes, he had what was probably the first eugenics program in U.S. history. He was selectively breeding the people in his commune, controlling who had sex with whom to produce a better form of the human race was his hope. And so he controlled who had sex with whom, and there were specific rules around how you were supposed to have sex. And the people involved, mostly seem to have done it with consent. We would use that term today. It doesn't seem to have been coerced, but it became very salacious news for readers. And there were some exposés that were published, and ultimately Noyes had to abandon Oneida, fled the country because there was so much media attention emphasizing the free love, the idea that there was sex outside marriage happening at Oneida, which there definitely was. But the way it got played, again, going back to the media, it becomes a story about promiscuity, about impurity, and about, free love, this shocking idea that's going to erode American morality and marriage.
It's an antiquated story. I'm starting to notice a pattern here.
Yeah.
Even cult podcasts need sponsors, everyone. Check out these must-haves. Hey everyone, it's Nippy here, and I'm here to tell you about the new addition to our thoroughbred lifestyle. As we've shared, Sarah and I are pretty healthy, or we try to be, and now there's a new sheriff in town. AG1. We do the smoothies, the gym sessions, the whole deal, and it's still tough to get every nutrient into our bodies to keep this podcast gold going. Finally, we tried AG1 and thought, all right, let's see if this lives up to the hype. And spoiler alert, it does. AG1 is a daily greens powder with 70 plus vitamins, minerals, and whole food source nutrients and 5 probiotic strains in one scoop. It's like our entire supplement routine gets replaced with something that actually fits our lifestyles. It's clinically shown to support gut health, fill nutrient gaps, and boost whole body health. Since we started, we both noticed the energy bump, no mid-afternoon crashes, and our digestion has been on point. The new AG1 Next Gen, they've stepped it up with killer flavors, tropical berry, citrus, plus the original. No more pills, one scoop, in the water, boom, on our day. What I love is how AG1 backs it up with gold standard clinical trials. In an industry full of empty promises, they're doing the real work. Peer-reviewed, rigorous science to prove it. For less than $3 a day with a subscription, you're getting over $7 worth of premium nutritional support. That's a no-brainer for simplifying your wellness. Want to try it? Head to drinkag1.com/culty to get a free welcome kit, including a bottle of vitamin D and free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe. That's drinkag1.com/culty.
You know that moment when you realize the holidays are basically tomorrow and suddenly your house looks less festive and more like we gave up in September? Yep, we've been there. That's why we are obsessed with Wayfair. They've got everything you need to make your home look like you totally have it together. Christmas trees, wreaths, inflatables for the yard, cozy bedding for the guest room, even those little accent pillows that make you look like you have taste. And the best part? It's all in one place, all at prices that don't make your wallet sad. We have found stuff recently that we didn't even know Wayfair had, like legit cookware that makes you feel like you could host a holiday special on the Food Network. Whether you're decking out the kids' rooms, refreshing your living room, or just trying to make sure that your guests don't have to dry their hands on your gym towel, Wayfair's got ya. It's your one-stop holiday miracle minus the stress and plus a lot more twinkle lights. There's something for every style and every home. One of our goals this holiday season is to furnish a new podcast recording studio with comfy chairs and some artwork, maybe a plant. We're looking forward to ordering everything we need in one convenient place with free and easy delivery at Wayfair. Get organized, refreshed, and ready for the holidays for way less. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop all things home. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair. Every style, every home. Oh, and happy holidays. Hey everybody, Sarah here. As you probably know if you're listening to our podcast, I have hit perimenopause, and that means I can no longer drink in the same way that I used to. And back in the old days when I was young, I used to have a drink or 2 or 3, but I just can't do that anymore. It totally affects my sleep and I get night sweats. And I still, however, like to be social and get a little buzz on, loosen up a little bit and have a drink in my hand, which is why I'm so excited about one of our newest sponsors. It's called Soul, and their products are out-of-office gummies and drinks, and these have been my new go-to. They help me unwind and ease into my evening without the alcohol or the next day fog. Soul gives you plant-based alternatives that deliver the relaxation and vibe you want without the headaches, the sluggish mornings, or performance dip. Soul is a wellness brand that believes feeling good should be fun and easy. It specializes in delicious hemp-derived THC and CBD products designed to boost your mood and help you unwind. Their best-selling out-of-office gummies were designed to provide a mild, relaxing buzz, boost your mood, and enhance creativity and relaxation. With 5 different strengths, you can tailor the dose to fit your vibe, from a gentle 1.5 milligram microdose to their newest 15 milligram gummy for a more elevated experience. And if you like their out-of-office gummies, try their new out-of-office beverage, a refreshing, alcohol-free alternative that's perfect for winding down on the couch or socializing with friends. Bring on the good vibes and treat yourself to Soul today. Right now, Soul is offering our audience 30% off your entire order. Go to getsoul.com and use the code Culty. That's getsoul.com, promo code Culty for 30% off.
Sponsor break's done. Now back for more Culty stories.
So, okay, we've talked about some of the controversy in these religious movements. So where does the Brotherhood of New Life come in?
So that is a movement that Thomas Lake Harris, who's the main person in my book, that's a movement that he starts. And Thomas Lake Harris was a controversial figure during his own lifetime. He's not well known today, but Harris was read by Walt Whitman, for example. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who's the author of the Sherlock Holmes stories, studied his work for decades. William James called Harris the America's best-known mystic. So in his time, Harris was a well-known and controversial figure. He came out of guess where? Upstate New York, this burned over district. He was an early spiritualist. He had dabbled in other religions, a lot of different other religions. He had an interest in mesmerism and Buddhism and many other things. But ultimately, he becomes a spiritualist, and he is a poet. So Harris writes these long, impenetrable poems that are frankly painful to read sometimes.
Word salad.
In which he will describe his spiritual journeys to go to Mars, and he'll talk about the gardens of Mars, and he'll talk about the different parts of heaven that he visits. And his poetry is long-winded and challenging to read, esoteric texts, ultimately, that are kind of appealing to some people because they're so impenetrable and open to interpretation, right?
And irrefutable.
He becomes the leader of his own movement, and he's kind of at odds with a lot of the other spiritualists. They tended to be scientists. They thought of themselves as, we're studying the afterlife, we're conducting experiments, we're getting answers to questions about what happens after you die. You know, what is God? What is heaven like? They saw spiritualism as a scientific endeavor. That was not Harris. Harris was interested in poetry. He was interested in breathing techniques that he developed that were kind of a form of deep breathing that he thought purified your body. And he believed that he was the pivotal man of creation that was foreordained to bring about the end of the world and to save a remnant of humanity. So he started his own movement called the Brotherhood of the New Life. And one of the interesting things about it is it had members from Scotland, it had members from England, it had members from Japan, it had members from the South of the United States, the West, and the East. So he ended up bringing together a very international group of followers, and he started several communes, first in New York and then ultimately in California.
And before we get into his, the scandal, tell us a little bit about some of the other people, like the key players in your book, that we need to know to understand what eventually plays out.
Sure. One of his main followers is someone named Kanae Nagasawa. And Nagasawa was from Japan, and his story is fascinating. When he was early teenager, he got sent under a secret name, under a false name, from Japan to England with a group of other samurai to study British science, technology, and culture. And at that point, out-migration from Japan was banned, and so he had to do it under a pseudonym, the name Kanae Nagasawa, which he would use for the rest of his life. And he ends up joining Harris's movement and becoming one of the very first Japanese immigrants to the United States. And then Nagasawa would become a central follower of Harris. He would run the vineyard, first in Harris's New York colonies, and then in California at Fountain Grove. And Nagasawa would end up inheriting the Fountain Grove lands in Santa Rosa, California, lands that ultimately today are worth billions of dollars. All of that would get inherited by Nagasawa ultimately. So his story is fascinating, and it brings in the way that the Japanese were viewed during this period, and it brings in kind of questions about why he would be interested in Harris.
When Harris is assembling this international group, is it a strategic move? Do you think he has a plan in mind about what he's going to do? And, obviously looking like you're garnering multiple perspectives looks progressive and may throw off the scent of what your real ulterior motive is. Where do you think he is in this thing? And is he corrupted along the way, or is this something he's premeditated, and does he have a plan of coercion?
Harris believed he was the pivotal man of creation, so he absolutely had global plans. He wanted international followers because he thought his movement, his message would spread to Asia through his Japanese followers, to Europe through his European followers, across the Americas because of his American followers. He planned to do a colony in Mexico. So he had global ambitions. Mm-hmm. He absolutely cultivated an international following for that reason.
That's impressive to be able to go and do all that and have kind of an international network like that back in the late 18th century.
I mean, everyone who met Harris was impressed by him. He was a charismatic, fiery preacher. When he preached, he was known for his incredible voice, and the gestures and the manner of delivery was apparently spellbinding. People talked throughout his entire life about his hypnotic eyes, and people who met him never forgot it.
So tell us a little bit about Alzire Chevalier. Who is she?
She becomes the catalyst for the sex scandal that would take Harris down and would ultimately help create the concept of the cult. Chevalier was from Boston, and she had grown up in the Episcopalian Church, but like a lot of people, she was a seeker. She wanted something more than traditional Christianity. And so she studied with Mary Baker Eddy. This is where Eddy and Christian Science enters the story. Chevalier studied with Eddy in Boston, but Chevalier ultimately didn't stay within Christian Science. She became a mental healer, but she left Christian Science behind, and she dabbled and read in all kinds of occult and spiritualist periodicals, and she edited her own newspaper in New York for a while. And Chevalier read about Harris, and she was fascinated because Harris talked about his breathing techniques and his ability to heal through meditation and breath. And he talked about, of course, his spiritual journeys and that he described in his poetry. So Chevalier decides she wants to go and study with Harris. She writes him a letter in 1891. She says, "Hey, can I come and study with you in Fountain Grove, California?" And Harris says, "Absolutely." So Chevalier comes to Fountain Grove with her mother, and she never officially joins the Brotherhood of the New Life, but she spends the summer of 1891 in a cottage at Fountain Grove. And she sees a lot of things that intrigue her in terms of Harris and his followers and the way they lived. And she starts to see some things that troubled her as well.
Do you
So cool.
believe all the legal affidavits and all the filings that she participated in were really lost?
Yes. Unfortunately, a lot of records were destroyed in the 1906 San Francisco fire. And a lot of the affidavits that Chevalier used to attack Harris, they did burn up.
Okay.
Darn it. You know what? I'm so amazed, though, even though that happened, how much information you were able to get. And also, I was quite struck by how information was able to disseminate. It's given that there's no TikTok, like the way that you talk about a lot of things and people sort of jumping on certain bandwagons. It's like, how did information spread so quickly in that era?
Well, because of the news media of the time, people read widely. So you see all kinds of occult periodicals and magazines and newspapers of all varieties that were spread from, coast to coast. And so when something happens in California, by the 1890s, it gets picked up by news services, and it gets sent to newspapers all around the country and across the Atlantic Ocean. So I found stories about Fountain Grove in India, in newspapers in all throughout Europe, because by the 1890s, the technology exists to disseminate information very rapidly.
Yeah, you just had to wait a day for your TikTok scroll.
Yeah, not quite as fast as TikTok.
Yeah. I was also struck by Chevalier and how definitely related to her, her seeking and wanting more than what life was apparently all about, and her journey to understand herself and to be better and also to have like a real impact. What was some of her cause-oriented wanting to do good in the world? What was she doing?
Yes, she really believed that the only way to really help people was through spiritual advancement. And so she was involved in all kinds of causes trying to help society's most vulnerable members. The first movement she got involved in Boston was asylum reform, so people who'd been put into insane asylums. She got involved in prison reform. She started the kindergarten movement. She was a Christian socialist. She was interested in workers' rights. She was a feminist and gave speeches in support of women's rights. So she saw all of these marginalized groups as needing spiritual and material help. She always linked the spiritual and the political.
She seemed pretty consistent on that front. And that may be one of the reasons she was able to withstand some of the slander, because she had a track record of actually having the principle or value of helping people. That was my hit of her, yeah.
I agree. She was very brave. She did what she thought was right, even when it brought a lot of scorn upon her.
Fair to say that she rejected Eddy and Christian Science because she started to feel what would later be called coercion. Did I get that accurate from your book?
Chevalier was a firm believer in her own spiritual path, and she resented Eddy's attempts to control her. Again, she wasn't alone. Eddy's best students tended to leave her for similar reasons. And she compared Eddie to the Catholic Church and the kind of the popish control that the Pope has over bishops, at least in Chevalier's understanding of the Catholic Church, right? So yes, she was an independent thinker, and her entire life she rejected anyone who tried to control herself and others. She was very much interested in helping people who were put in positions where they didn't have power. And that's why she devotes most of her later life to prison reform in Los Angeles, helping prisoners because she felt like they had been put in a situation that they were being coerced, that they had no control over their lives.
Yeah, I brought that up because I feel like that's important for, I wonder what would have happened if she'd gone to Fountain Grove and had not had that experience and maybe would have been more susceptible to Harris. But because she had that experience first, she's like, I've seen this before. Just a theory, obviously we can't ask her. So we're going to take a little break. And when we come back for part 2, we'll cover what happened at Fountain Grove, why she left, what the sex scandal was, who died, anything else that we think we're going to, just to whet the appetite of our audience. What are they going to hear in part 2?
Yes, so there'll be descriptions of the sex scandal, including we can get into whether we think it was true or not, what Chevalier was saying. There was a surprise wedding in the middle of the scandal, and then ultimately a murder investigation at Fountain Grove.
Right, all of this. And we'll draw some parallels. We forgot to mention not only were Harris and many other people, including Joe Smith and Keith Raniere.
There's like a Ghislaine Maxwell figure.
Right, there's a Ghislaine Maxwell. And why are they all celibate? Why are they all saying I guess Joseph Smith wasn't celibate.
Air quotes.
But Harris and Raniere both said they were celibate when clearly they were not. So we'll get into that. And then we'll talk about how the use of the word cult even came to be and the history there.
Sounds good.
All right. See you on Thursday.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody. We're going to stop there for part 1. Please do join us Thursday for part 2 with Josh Paddison.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to the wave of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
We hope you're enjoying A Little Bit Culty. If so, please do show us some love. Drop a rating or leave a review. Hit subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/alittlebitculty.
Even better, send this episode to someone who needs it. Maybe they're in a cult. Maybe they're just a little bit susceptible. Or maybe they just love a good story. Spread the word, spread the love. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production.
Executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound. Our co-creator is Jess Temple Tardy.
Our production coordinator is Leslie Dinsmore.
Writing by Sandra Nomoto and social media marketing by Eric Swarzinski and Brooke Keene.
Our theme song, Cultivated, is by the artists John Bryant and Nigel Aslan.